What's up, people? I have another banger of a conversation to drop this week for you all, following my conversation with Matt Segall from the California Institute of Integral Studies. Once I booked Matt, I immediately reached out to him, and he graciously accepted my invite on short notice. Ever since I discovered his work on the Pill Pod and his connection with Matt's work up at CIIS, I've been wanting to have this chat with him. So without further ado, here's my chat with Chris Satoor on rethinking German idealism, religion, and the left in North America and beyond. Boom. Here we are. Hello, Chris. Super excited to talk to you, especially, because I'm coming off a conversation with Matt Segall, and I couldn't think of a better guest to have on afterwards to go and talk about German idealism. And you're everywhere these days in terms of when it comes to German idealism. And I love your work. I love everybody that you've been working with. So there's like a whole network of scholars that you've exposed me to. And just have really lit me up, man. I'm just, super excited to go and talk to you about some of these scholars and your recent paper as well. So welcome to the pod.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, Erik, and thank you so much for that nice little introduction here.
Excellent. Yeah. I thought I would just go and start off by, I guess, just sharing how I came across your work. And how we got kind of acquainted. The first time I came across you specifically was on the Pill Pod, talking about vitalism, talking about process philosophy, and some aspects of I guess French spiritualism in terms of Bergson and stuff like that. And that's what really drew me into that pod, in terms of the plastic pills pod. But how I got pulled into even the pill pod is an interesting one as well, too, because, what drew me in was really Matt McManus's work in terms of postmodern conservatism for various reasons. He kind of, his online writing and kind of shot to fame. Critiquing Jordan Peterson, talking about postmodern conservatism. And that's what really caught my attention because of my background, I guess, associated with guys like Ken Wilber and Habermas in particular, which hopefully we'll be able to go and touch upon a bit as well there too, in terms of how that fits in with German idealism. So that's what drew me to it, because Pills eventually did I guess a video on postmodern conservatism, and then that's how I got pulled into that orbit. And since then I've been following all of your work with great enthusiasm, particularly after figuring out that you guys are all Canadian. You're all from Toronto, and you guys are representing. So I really love the fact that you guys are going out there and doing that, and that there's this really cool cohort of Canadian scholars that are kind of up and coming, and you guys just exposing me to so many good scholars as well, scholars that I didn't know about, particularly Sean McGrath. Hopefully we'll be able to go and touch upon a bit. So yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there and throw that at you there from there. How did you get roped in, I guess, to the Pill Pod, or how did you meet everybody around York and stuff like that and start getting into German idealism specifically?
I started, well, thank you for that question. So before I went into university to do my degree in Bachelor of Arts in philosophy, I actually went to a community college before I did university, and I just took a regular general arts and applied science program, and there was a retired Kantian scholar there actually, named Brian Nakata, and he was a Kant scholar for a bit, and then he just left the university, and he really liked the college vibe. But I remember sitting in a lecture, and at the time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was just taking this degree. I was just taking this so I can get into university. And he uttered the words "sapere aude" by Kant, "dare to know, have the courage to use your own reason." And that kind of woke me from my dogmatic slumber. It shook me, and from there, I started reading everything by Kant with him. And so when I got into university, I already had Kant underneath my belt, and I started taking everything that I could that was continental philosophy, and anything to do with Kant or Hegel. I hadn't read Schelling yet. And so I was just obsessed with Kant and Hegel right through my undergraduate. They were two thinkers that I couldn't stop reading. I started a group called the Radical Continentalists at my university, and I'm still good friends with all the members. Actually, one of the members, his name is Avi Munahur, and he's running for president in Mauritius, this little island off the close to Madagascar. And a couple of my other friends, they're finishing their PhDs, and they're all working in German idealism. My one friend Jeanette is working on Novalis. My friend Borna is working on Hegel. And so I'm working on Schelling. And so we gravitated towards German idealism. And it just seemed that German idealism was kind of like the sun in a galaxy. All the other planets or all the other academic fields like phenomenology or structuralism kind of rotated around this global sun that was German idealism. And I then had a kind of detour from German idealism. I started reading some postmodern philosophy. I got I got pulled into Gilles Deleuze, who I'm not a big fan of anymore. I was reading Foucault and Deleuze and Guattari and Derrida and stuff like that, but my heart really wasn't there. It like really wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't there in the sense that I thought this was fantastic. I was super interested in it, but something was missing. And so during my master's, I met Pills and Matt McManus. Actually, I met Matt McManus in a graduate course. We were by this kind of prolific professor that has a name around our campus. His name is Brayton Polka, and he's a great theological scholar and published lots of texts for Lexington, the Lexington Publishing Company. Anyways, we all met and we kind of gravitated towards each other. So Pills and myself and another friend Victor, who's also been on the Pill Pod, not Victor Brazzoni, but Victor H. He's also called the Lit Guy.
Yeah.
He was there, and Matt, and we were talking about Kierkegaard and Hamlet, and Spinoza, who was a great love of mine. I wrote my honors thesis actually
Oh,
on
no way.
Spinoza. Yeah, on Spinoza. Um, so from there, we just became a bunch of drinking guys. We would go to the bar and just sit and talk at the university pub and just talk about philosophy and concepts. And then we started doing our PhDs together, and we got much more closer. But the funny thing is that Matt was in public policy. I think he was in public policy. I could be wrong about that.
Legal studies, the
Yeah,
critical legal
that's right.
studies. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Sorry. Legal studies. I was with Pills in the humanities department, and at the time he was really working towards Baudrillard and Derrida and a lot of this stuff surrounding the um, uh, philosophy of language in regards to continental stuff. So, like, there's nothing outside the text and the death of the author and things like these. But After that, I kind of I left I left the work of Deleuze behind and started investigating in French, in early French philosophy, like 18th, 19th century. And I started reading the French spiritualists, who
Hmm.
were actually really kind of like medical physicalists. So they were kind of into the vitalists from Montpellier were actually doctors that were trying to heal the soul. But in order to heal the soul, they wanted to heal the body first.
Hmm.
This is a lot of like Barthez and Théophile de Bourdieu and then Cabanet and Bichat and some of those other great French thinkers um, that are kind of neglected in the West. And I thought this was a project. I was going to do this project on French spiritualism and its relation to vitalism, because vitalism has such a vulgar understanding in the contemporary zeitgeist. Everyone thinks when they think of vitalism, they think of spirits and ghosts and weird stuff like that, and that's not the case. And French spiritualism, which has nothing to do with the spiritualism of like Allan Kardec, who believed that you could resurrect spirits from dead bodies or something like that. So
Yeah.
nothing like that. But I started getting into people like Ravaisan, and Ravaisan's a thinker that was related to Schelling, actually, believe it or not. They had a good friendship. Ravaisan studied with Schelling in Berlin and was going to translate his philosophy of mythology into French. So I had this relationship right there. And when Pills started the the podcast, the Pill Pod, sorry, there was no one really to talk about Deleuze. And since I was at the time, I was getting past the French theory.
You're
Um,
recovering
I was,
Deleuzian.
yes, as I call myself, I'm a recovering Deleuzian. Yes, from my recovering state, I would come on and talk about Deleuze and Bergson because Pills was working on systems theory
Yeah.
and its relation, and also some stuff on process philosophy.
Yeah.
So I
And
could dabble.
Eric is
E-
really into that as well in terms
Erik
of,
is very much into
yeah,
systems theory and
exactly.
semiotics.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of overlap, and so we could all talk about Bergson and Whitehead, and I don't know Nicholas Luhmann like they do, and um, so there were a lot of overlaps. So I came on one time because I had asked Pills to do an episode on vitalism because I wanted to,
Well, there's a few episodes where you're
yeah.
touching on all these subjects, and I'll actually put those in the show notes as well. I mean, they're amazing. I mean, they're great chats and they're lively. And I mean, that's what really drew me in. And then, and then eventually I just joined their Discord. Uh, and I mean, the sparks were flying. I mean, there was just so much good material coming out of there. And I was just like, wow, like I couldn't, uh, well, I was just learning so much. I mean, you guys were dropping so much information in there. And for me, as somebody that was coming out of religious studies,
Mhm.
that was hammered with Habermas, all these subjects fit in nicely and neatly in terms of my interest, which was kind of forced upon me in a certain way during my. I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Habermas. I'm happy that I slugged through it with certain professors, and they exposed me to that strand of critical theory through his work, and its impact on religious studies and theology, some aspects of theology, because it's a dimension that doesn't get really talked about that much in critical theory these days. So
Mhm.
once I saw all that, I was just like, oh my God, like this is crazy. Like I'm so happy I discovered, all of your work. And Matt at that point was publishing all over. I mean, the man's a machine in terms of how much stuff he can go and put out. But what really struck me at one point, it was you and Erik were talking about Matt Segall's work and 4E Cogsci. And I was just like,
Mhm.
whoa, I'm like, what the hell is Matt Segall doing in this discussion? Somebody from the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is really my wheelhouse that, kind of I grew up in terms of that kind of literature, because of my interest in East Asian studies, and obviously, some of the counterculture type stuff around figures like D.T. Suzuki and Alan Watts. and those types of figures. So I got drawn for a very long time into that sphere. So when I saw all these worlds colliding, I was just like, oh my God, this is like so bizarre, yet so exciting for me to see all these different schools of thought in a certain way that were coming together. And just so many online kind of groups developing around this type of stuff. And at this point, I mean, as well, I mean, you really took off in terms of German idealism. It's like you went knee deep in at that point. And you started to, obviously, you created a whole sort of online community now around German idealism around this time as well, which you pulled me in. And I've been getting like an amazing education out of all of this. Just listening to everybody that are involved on the Discord, that are involved on Twitter, that so many of people that actually have podcasts now, and some people with very strong academic credentials that have great, institutional roots. Two of which, I mean, I'll drop right now is, I mean, Jason Worth and Sean McGrath, which I had no idea. They had kickstarted the Schelling Society of North America. So I guess this is the other thing too. Like, I mean, how and why do you think this is happening now with German idealism in a certain way in North America, like and online around the excitement of some of all this? What do you think is the reason around it?
Well, I mean, I got pulled into German idealism by my mentor, Joan Steigerwald, who teaches at York. She's a philosopher of the history of science, and she teaches on Kant and Schelling and Fichte. And when I took her class, it was my last class actually for coursework, believe it or not, in my PhD, and it was like a light went off in my head because it was a return to German idealism for me. It was a complete, complete circle. I went, the circle is now complete. I'm just kidding. but I was like right back into German idealism, and this time with Schelling. But the funny thing is that, and here's why I did this. In the 1970s and 80s, there was the Hegel Society and SUNY. So a lot of these books are being published by SUNY, SUNY, so the State University of New York. Giovanni and H.S. Harris were publishing all these books on Hegel, and there were the odd books on Schelling. So you could find a book by Alan White on Schelling. You could find a book by Robert F. Brown on Schelling. You could find a book by Dale Snow on Schelling. And there were some translations of Schelling's work coming out, like on University Studies, Bruno, and the 1936 translation of the Freedom Essay. But there was no real concentration on Schelling until, I'd say, the late 90s with people like Andrew Bowie. So I started looking into Schelling really seriously in like 2018. And there was nothing online for Schelling. Everything was dominated by Hegel. And anytime I tried to bring up Schelling, I would be, told, this is a Hegel place. You don't want to upset Hegel bros. You never want to do that. So I was a little frustrated because at the same time, I wanted to meet like-minded people that are interested in Schelling and Fichte, who, by the way, is also kind of neglected in the literature. And I thought the only way to do this would be to like seriously start a community. And the first thing I thought of at first was Facebook. So I started a Facebook group in around 2020, just before COVID hit.
Okay.
On Schelling and German idealism. And I just reached out to everybody. I reached out to every kind of scholar I could think of. Daniel Briesel, who's a Fichte scholar, Chelsea Harry, who's a Schelling scholar, everybody. Bruce Matthews is a Schelling scholar. I just, all these Kant scholars. And I was trying to tell them, look, I'm trying to make a community for all of us, students, academics. And I call people that are not, in school at the time or not studying or have a degree. I call them enthusiasts. I think it's a nice term
Yeah.
because you're reading, you're interested, but you're not in academia, and that's totally fine. So I was trying to get this environment going, this community going, and then it just took off. It was
Yeah.
like first it was a place where Schillingians could gather. But then we got Fichteans and Kantians asking me, "Hey, can we join too? Because we don't have a place either." It's like, really? Kant is everywhere. So then, yes. So then, now we're a community of 3,000 people, and I started, talking to all of these Schillingians and telling them about this and come join. And what I did was I made all of them admins because the group, I said, is not mine. I
Yeah.
made the group. I facilitate the group, but the group is all of ours. It's a community. And so like I'll facilitate if there's spam or something, but really I don't own the group. I made sure that everyone knew that this is our group. So everyone really liked that dynamic. And from there, I decided to make a Discord because that way, we weren't just posting PDFs or quotes or asking questions. We can actually get a dynamic set up. And so the Discord is actually great. We have Gabriel Gottlieb, who is a Fichte scholar on there. We have Kyla Bruff, who's a Schelling scholar. You're also on there as well too, running our world philosophy section, which I'm very happy that you are.
Yeah.
So it became a really nice network, but I wasn't finished there yet. I wanted to also link because Twitter can be a great place and it can also be a very scary place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I signed up for one of the first Twitter communities to come out there, which was a German idealism and German romanticism community, and I think we're up to 600 now, and that's really thriving too. So that's how I started doing it. And then what I would do is, it was COVID, and my university library was shut down. So I was like, what do I do? I don't have access to a library. I started buying all these used books, every text I could get on German idealism, the history. I mean, I have all these texts I have from my undergraduate, but I started reading them and writing reviews and posting them on Twitter and trying to meet as much people as possible. And this is not just for me to network. This is because I really want to. I really want a community of just people that are in love with German idealism.
Yeah.
And the thing is, and you're right. Sorry to jump all over the place. It
No,
was
not at all.
Erik.
This is fantastic. I mean, I love the background story
it
to all of
it it
this.
was it was Erik that introduced me to Matt Segall. And I had never watched Matt's, I made this inside joke to Matt that and he really laughed about this. I made this inside joke. We were talking once, and I said, Matt's videos are kind of like this. He'll pose a question and then look up to the sky to get answers from God or something, and then like you'll see his face, you'll see his face. You know what I mean? He
Yeah.
just kind of laughed. But I had never watched it. It was Erik that showed me who he was, and then
Okay. Okay.
I kind of reached out to him, and then we started chatting. We had a talk about Schelling and Whitehead, and that was really fruitful. And then next thing I know, we started another group called the Friends of Wisdom. So there was a whole bunch of videos of a whole bunch of us from different backgrounds: integral theory,
Yeah.
Eastern philosophy, German idealism. Um, we had someone that was also really into psychoanalysis and Jung, and we had people that were into astrology and Steiner. So it was this really great eclectic mix of all of these different thinkers and people coming together. So I've been surrounded by a lot of people and a lot of thought, and it's been really, really, really inspiring to meet all of these people and to talk to them. Because what I like doing is I'm not one of those people that won't have a discussion with someone. If someone private messages me, I'm going to respond back to them. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to engage with them, unless they're delusions. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, but still, but still, yeah. So that's pretty much the kind of nexus of what's going on and how it all started. And yeah, Matt is actually a really good friend now. So we've talked about doing a couple other projects. We did an online Twitter space, him and I, and we talked about Whitehead. He's the Whitehead guy. He
Yeah.
knows Whitehead better than a lot of people that I know. He's brilliant when it comes to
Well, that's
process
that's
philosophy.
really his specialization in terms of of that. But I mean, through my conversation with him, it's interesting because I mean, we all grew up on almost the same diet of thinkers and people that have influenced us and stuff like that. So guys like Jeremy Johnson and I mean Matt and obviously Michael Brooks. I mean, this is the main reason why I went out and started my podcast in a certain way, because a lot of people don't know this about Michael Brooks. Is I mean, he grew up on this particular diet of scholars and
Nice.
thinkers and stuff like that. They go all the way back. Um, and the interesting thing for me is, I mean, well, Jeremy and Matt, I mean, because of where they started off, eventually they, you know, they picked their guys and they specialize. I mean, Jeremy went after Gene Gebser and Matt did Whitehead, but now them as well. I mean, everybody's going back to German idealism, and to me, that's interesting as somebody that has a background, I guess, with Habermas. That's where he started,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
Habermas has a fantastic, brilliant dissertation on Schelling, actually. It's fan
exactly.
Yeah, it's a brilliant thesis. Um, one of the best, actually, and it's on one of the hardest books that Schelling wrote on the ages of the world. Um, and it's very, very interesting um, how he reads Schelling. He's very, very good. He's a very good scholar, and he's very well at picking up a lot of the kind of subtleties in Schelling's thoughts. So he brings out the fact that Schelling is inspired by Kabbalah, by Jakob
Hmm.
Böhme, and the theosophical tradition with Oettinger and Johann Albrecht Bengel. And so the great thing about it is you don't just get this surface layer reading with Habermas. You get this kind of multi-dimensional reading that where you get the arguments, you get the premises and the conclusion, but you also get the background story of it, the what I love about it, the mystical aspect of it. And it's not just not the mystical, but the Schelling really wanted to take theosophical terms and make them into concrete concepts. And so Habermas does this really great job of showing that
Yeah.
that process actually.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, he's well to me, he's an amazing scholar. I mean, either which way. But I mean, his interest, what a lot of people don't go out and realize, is that he has a huge interest in Kabbalah and the Jewish tradition, in terms of the Jewish religious tradition, not just from a cultural aspect and stuff like that, which people don't really realize. And for me, I mean, now that I'm out of academia and I've kind of, you know, like it's still there lingering in the back of my mind, and yet, like, I'm seeing that pop back around. And like you said, I mean, there was this really Hegelian moment that's still thriving,
It is.
even
Yep.
particularly within the Canadian context. I think about, you know, Charles Taylor and even the idea of what so-called Canadian idealism is, that it's all based on Hegel in a certain way. There's a few, you know, top names like George Grant and Charles Taylor. Um, but there's Schelling has been there in the background as well, like Watson, way back when, who was part of the British idealism tradition, was very much into Schelling. And now we have another big name in Canada, Sean McGrath, that is, I mean, an amazing German idealist scholar all around, that you exposed me to. And I can't be, you know, like, I'm so thankful for you to go and, you know, start posting about him more and learning about his work. Um, how did you come across Sean's work first time around, or when did it pop up on your radar specifically?
Well, you see the okay, so this is a kind of a longer story, but I'll get to it if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Yeah, sure, for sure.
So, you know, Schelling has written so many philosophical texts, and sometimes it's seen that he has like 10 different systems, and that's not really true. But there are certain scholars that write on Schelling's nature philosophy, his identity philosophy, his middle period, which starts with the freedom essay and the ages, and then finally his positive. So I'm interested in his middle period, which starts with the freedom essay and goes all the way to the philosophy of revelation. The problem is there's not a lot of scholarship on this era. So there's a
Mm,
lot of scholarship on the identity philosophy and the nature philosophy. We can thank, the people that I've cited already, Andrew Bowie, Judith Norman, um, Robert F. Brown, um, so many great scholars that have been writing on this earlier stuff, Edward Beach. But this, when it came to the freedom essay and the ages of the world, um, there wasn't a lot of scholarship. And this is where I started reading, like even Jason Wirth's unbelievable text, The Conspiracy of Life, which is a series of meditations on different aspects of Schelling's thought. So it goes from the Neoplatonic era, where he's starting his first essays, to Clara, this dialogue, to the freedom essay, to his nature philosophy. It's a fantastic text. Jason is a brilliant scholar. And so I was looking for this text, and my advisor, Joan, who knows Sean very well, said, you should take a look at this book called The Dark Ground of Spirit, and look at Sean McGrath's work. And I read it, and the first time I read it, now keep in mind, at this time, I didn't know anything about Jewish mysticism. I didn't know anything about Kabbalah. I didn't know anything about the mystical tradition. But this book was a huge epiphany, because then I started reading. I reached out to another scholar named Wouter Hahngraf, who's a good friend, and he's a scholar in Hermeticism and esotericism. And so he also helped point out some things, but Sean also knows him as well. So all of a sudden, I saw this hidden layer deep inside German idealism that starts off with the German Teutonic tradition. It starts off with Martin Luther, and then from Luther it goes to Meister Eckhart and Nicholas of Cusanus, and then from Cusanus, Swedenborg, and then Jakob Böhme and Erdinger, and all of these people that are they're in all of these texts. Hegel was inspired by Eckhart and Böhme. Schopenhauer as well. Schelling even more so, because Schelling grew up in a kind of German, a Lutheran pietist background. But Sean's book brilliantly goes through all of this entire history. So it's a book.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
book on. It's a book in a sense on depth psychology. That's looking at his argument is that it's Schelling, not Freud, that's created the unconsciousness, and it's because of this rich history with theosophy that we get an understanding of consciousness and unconsciousness, and the unconscious is linked to the past, and consciousness is linked to the present, and there's this rupture between the two, and somewhere the subject is filled into there, is split in the middle of that. But Sean's book, which I highly recommend to any of your viewers, starts off slowly. It goes through the biblical text. It goes through the New Testament, of course, and it goes through a lot of the Kabbalah references through Isaac Luria and stuff, which is really important. But Burma is so important, and it was Sean, and I've had discussions with him about this, about how important Jakob Burma is to Schelling's philosophy and to German idealism. He is someone that not a lot of thinkers know about, and he's become one of my favorite thinkers, and he's the kind of skeleton, or the heartbeat behind German idealism, and post-Kantian German idealism, so after Kant. And so this book is fantastic. It goes through it has rich biblical hermeneutics. It goes into Kabbalah. It goes into Hermeticism, esotericism. He shows the lineage from Paracelsus to Agrippa to Burma. Like, there's so much work that he's put into this text. It's a brilliant text.
But his work just in general, and I mean, the online video that you sent me in terms of his Luther talk, amazing. Like that,
unbelievable.
Like, as somebody with a background in religious studies, like I would have done anything to be able to sit down and dive into his work. I mean, because his work is not only philosophical, but I mean, he has deep theological understanding of all these traditions and Christianity as a whole within the mix or in dialogue with German idealism. And I'm still floored about his his work on Heidegger. I mean, his Heidegger work for me was just like mind-boggling for me.
Yeah, the way he reads
Yeah,
Heidegger as the kind of modern Luther, like that
yeah.
is just, um, sorry, I interrupted you, but yeah, go on,
No,
continue.
no. I
Sorry.
mean, that's exactly what it is. I mean, he uncovers his deep Catholic roots in a certain way, and how he's wrestling with the Reformation, and I mean, phenomenology, and but yet you can see the undercurrents of what he's kind of suppressing, which is basically his Christian roots in a certain way, right? And he almost comes, well, he does. He eventually comes full circle at the end of his life in a certain way, and it adds this complexity to Heidegger that, one, I mean, I did not know, and yet that interpretation of Heidegger has come to go and influence a lot of people in postmodern theology. Guys like Saputo, or even him in dialogue with Saputo. In terms of his work, in terms of postmodern theology. And I mean, that to me is something that's kind of part of my religious studies stuff when I was getting into Habermas, and how Habermas was kind of in cahoots with, duking it out with postmodernists, and where does critical theory go and fit into this, and how does he relate to religion and stuff. So, I mean, for me, it's been an ongoing continuation of my studies. But what I love about it is that he's Canadian.
But
He's out
that
there in the middle of nowhere, out in the out east. I mean, doing amazing work, and yet he's not. Well, to me, anyways. I mean, it was somebody that I was not aware of, and I find that nobody is really talking about. And I mean, even more interesting than Latour and Zizek,
yeah,
in a certain way,
I
in
think
terms
so.
of his writing and stuff like that.
Yeah, so like this book made me realize that I had no background in medieval philosophy.
Yeah.
So after reading that, I went on this like I went through this reading, splurge where I was reading Augustine, Aquinas, Boethius, Anselm, like Erogena, all the way up to, the Theosophical tradition and the Teutonic tradition. So because of Sean, I had this rich, and I'm not even one of his students. I had this rich this rich theological education from him, and I met him. Well, I guess if you count 3 days, that's 3 times, and we've talked over emails. But yeah, so it's so funny. I never got a chance to tell him that actually, because I was at the time when I met him, I was helping my advisor run the Schelling conference. I was helping, but I also presented as well too. So yeah, I didn't get a lot of chance, but we did end up talking. And he has a new book on the late Schelling, where he has this brilliant analysis of Schelling being this ecstatic theologian, and having a kind of speculative ontology. And I didn't even know what a speculative ontology was until I started reading it. So, yeah, so it's a fantastic text as well too. So Sean is a really, really multi-dimensional thinker. He's got so much there. And the funny thing is, I asked him like, I wanted to know, like, I had this chance to ask him one time when he was presenting what he considered himself, and he called himself an idealist,
Mm.
which I really liked. He said, all my work is in idealism, and I consider myself an idealist scholar. I really liked that answer, because I like this idea that there here is a person working with this rich tradition, and he's calling himself, an idealist, as opposed to just a materialist, or a realist, or an ontologist, or this and that. Here he is sticking to the rich tradition, and also presenting contemporary readings and understandings of it. So really profound for me,
Yeah.
actually.
No, and I mean, he's battling. I mean, the object ontology folks. I mean, the heart, like speculative realism. I mean, he has his hand in all these other debates as well. Latour. I mean, this is what I'm excited to go and talk to you about as well. Is, I mean, your particular paper in his book in terms of thinking nature, and how this crisscrosses with Jason's work as well. In terms of his stuff, in terms of with Schelling and his interest in terms of, well, I mean, just in terms of Buddhism and the ecological movement and stuff like that. And the fact that they're in cahoots through the Schelling Society in North America, like this is wild. Like this is like really cool. Well, one timing of it, and to see so many people that are being exposed to this kind of thinking. And well, this is the other thing too, that I mean, like, because you guys are all saying, well, you could go out and self-identify as a sort of Schelling or even idealist, but their work in a certain way is rethinking German idealism. Like you guys are thinking with German idealism, yet transforming the tradition in a particular way. And the fact that it's taking root in North America, to me, is really interesting. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that. Do you think it's because I mean it's coming into the Anglosphere in a certain way? It's coming into North America. It's interacting with the Canadian sort of and North American sort of long tradition of Hegelianism that's been there a long time. Now all of a sudden, like that there's this stirring up of the tradition and a sort of rethinking of what that is. So I was curious to hear your thoughts. Like what do you think is going on there? Is it just pure like excavation of scholarly type proper interpretation, or are you guys transforming the tradition as well?
I mean, that's a great question. I think at the same, okay, so I think, so number one, I think any person that's a Kantian or a Fichtean or a Hegelian or Schellingian, they don't see the world as Hegel and Schelling and everyone else did, in the 19th century. I think what we're doing is we're adapting our kind of modern lens on their philosophies. For me, and I think Sean and Jason would agree, not that I'm trying to speak for them, is that Schelling's philosophy and German idealism is kind of a modern project in a weird way. Because if the beginning of it starts off with Hume's skepticism, it wakes Kant from his dogmatic slumber, and he starts doing this project to create this kind of transcendental philosophy. And then this project from Kant ripples like ripples in the water, and then we get great thinkers like Schulze and Mendelssohn and Jacobi and Kant and Fichte, Schelling, all the way to Schopenhauer. But it doesn't end there. See, this is the thing. People think it just ends with Schopenhauer. We go to Marx and then that's it. No, we get people like Lorenz Aachen, who Ian Hamilton Grant is working with, and Lotze. We get Hermann Cohen and Cassirer, and even in Germany, even before phenomenology, the early phenomenologists surrounded by Husserl were all neo-Kantian. So there was this rich tradition, and even Heidegger was, and Karl Jaspers were the first to kind of not in return but rethink both Hegel and Schelling. And I think like for Heidegger and for Jaspers, it's because they consider them not idealists but ontologists. They think there's a kind of rich ontology there that can be rethought. Now, of course, Heidegger always turns everything into him. But I think really at the heart of it is that, as I said before, German idealism is this kind of nexus that everything kind of swarms around. And it's also such a rich kind of dynamic theory that there's more to it than just there's no subject, there's no truth, there's I mean my problem with postmodernism, and I'm probably going to get into trouble for this, and you're kind of like this a lot, is this. You see, every time I tell someone this, they agree with me, and then half the time when I say this, they're also doing post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is like putting yellow tape around an object. So just imagine, the yellow police tape that you put around an object.
Yeah.
So it puts this yellow tape around an object, and what happens is that the philosophers come in and they dismantle the object. They look at all the flows and ebbs, what made the object. Let's say it's this pen that I'm holding, and then that's it. And then what's left is these pieces of the pen. Now that they've torn it apart, what do they do now?
Yeah.
Well, they don't present any, how can we make new pens? It's just, and I could be being very vulgar about this, but this is how I see it.
And rightly
They,
so, I would say.
they give you this image of these fallen pieces. By
Yeah.
the way, I think Matt Segall would also believe with me as Matt Segall, sorry, would also believe this as well. I think he agreed with me when I was telling him this. And so we have this shattered image, like, as funny as it sounds, Deleuze at the end of the cinema book says the reason why we love cinema so much is because we no longer believe in the world. And
Wow.
I think this is the case right now. Why German idealism is so powerful and why it's so why it's being brought back again is because I don't think we believe in the world anymore. I think we need to rethink nature. I think we need to rethink the subject. I think we need to rethink how people communicate and how people act with one another. We've been, hibernating for 2.5 years in our
Yeah.
houses. We're at the heart of an ecological crisis. We're on the brink of possibly World War III. I'm being very hyperbolic here,
Yeah.
but you see what I'm saying. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
there's things that we need to rethink. We need to rethink the human condition, and I think a lot of the kind of post-humanism stuff is not going in the right direction. And I think Sean also agrees with that. He, in his text, Thinking Nature, I think he
Mm,
also agrees that instead of thinking post-humanism, let's think about humans in nature. We are part of nature, as opposed to transhumanism or posthumanism, in that sense. So I'm in 100% aligned with his thinking on that, and that's what I really think is happening. I think we're rethinking subjectivity, and I
yeah.
don't mean in terms of performativity in Butler's sense, or habits in the Humean sense, and the kind of speculative empiricism that's going on, and speculative realism. I really think we're thinking about what the dynamic human is. How do we move forward in this century? How do we do,
Absolutely.
right? That's what I
Oh yeah.
honestly think is
Oh
going
yeah,
on.
and
And
that's what I'm so excited about as well. I mean, to me, that even fits in with the 4I Cogsci movement. I mean, it's not just you're rethinking subjectivity. I mean, you're rethinking your subjectivity in a fully embodied form in the world, right? I mean,
right.
like you're. I mean, it's. I mean, maybe Siegel or Matt would go out and refer to it as in terms of this organic speculative sort of ontology type idea. Like, I mean, we're fully engrossed in the world, yet fully organic, and nature fully coming into its own being and aliveness, and yet needs to go and maintain a healthy relationship to nature and to our environment. Um, yeah, no, I mean, I'm totally on board with you in terms of that. I mean, the other thing too that it makes me think about is, I mean, I mean, in terms of Latour, I mean, Sean rips into Latour quite a bit, and he rips into Zizek as well. And I appreciate it in a certain way. I mean, but I mean, Latour's kind of idea in terms of that we've never been modern, or even in terms of Habermas feels that we've never actually achieved the Enlightenment, right? That I mean, it was just we just never got there. I mean, it's turned into this fragmented mess that needs to go out and be fully reintegrated and fully learned and fully, put into work.
See,
Um,
sorry, go on.
yeah, but I mean, either which way, like to me, that these debates that they're out there, uh, it's just so rich right now. There's so much going on in terms of thought out there, uh, that I'm so excited about, and I'm being exposed to much, kind of for the first time in a certain
You
way
see,
as well.
the the thing that I look at it this way, I think there's a lot of bad scholarship on the Enlightenment. I
Mm,
mean, a lot of people think the Enlightenment is just, okay, the scientific revolution, and then people became semi-learned, and then industrialization and slavery, and that's it. No, that's not what happened.
yeah,
Um, I mean, not to sound not to sound like I'm being sarcastic or anything, but the Enlightenment was not just, it wasn't us just rebelling against the medieval era, the Renaissance or anything, because the Renaissance was a great era. We were reconnecting with our heritage of Greek and Roman and Persian and Indian texts, and bringing all this great, wonderful literature. It's the start of Hermes Trismegistus in a sense of resurrecting Hermes Trismegistus in the Renaissance. But the Enlightenment brought the condition for Romanticism.
Mm,
This is my favorite era. Like the
yeah.
Romantic era is rebelling against the kind of over-cognitive era of the Enlightenment. So this is the one thing that we think of. We think of like cognition, the over, reason is what leads the Enlightenment, right? Like I'm mocking it because, but no,
Well,
but
it's a
not just
completely
that,
disembodied reason. I mean,
right?
that's like,
But
yeah.
we get so many brilliant, like we get Holderlin from this, Novalis, we get the Schlegel brothers, who, by the way, were all living together. They lived at this house with Goethe and Schiller, and Schelling was there. And the funny thing is that the Enlightenment wasn't just a kind of rationalizing of the world. It was kind of it was a moment where we could make, as Schelling says, the alpha and the omega, sorry, freedom, the alpha and the omega of everything. And that was not just in society, that was in art and science and philosophy. And a lot of this gets lost. And I think Latour loses this aspect of it. Now, I
Yeah.
want to say one thing about Latour that's interesting. I think Latour does a good job of breaking down the subject object distinction, but he doesn't rethink it. I think we, instead of just looking at his actors and networks and making everything a flat ontology, I think we need to, as Schelling says, give the warm breath of love back, of love and life back to nature and to
Mm,
everything.
yeah.
So we don't need to make everything flat in order to understand relations. We can still have a relational ontology and think subject and predicate, and we can think of these things as long as we make everything equal. There's an equality between the predicate, or sorry, the object and the subject, and that the object, from its perspective, is a subject. This is the Schellingian 1800 turn. But anyway, sorry. So there's this great rich history that a lot of people aren't don't get a lot of access to and don't think through. And even now in the nature literature, we don't have to just do the speculative realist. We don't have to just jump into object oriented ontology. We don't just have to jump into post humanism. There are people rethinking Holderlin, who was at the time, in his early teenage years, he was living with Hegel and Schelling at Tübingen, at this school, the seminary school. So
Yeah.
there's so many thinkers that we can think of. There are people rethinking Goethe. There's Dalia Nassar actually. I was just looking at her new book recently, and she's rethinking the relationship of of the early kind of Enlightenment science and the philosophy of biology and rethinking all of these things, which is wonderful. So there's a lot of pull and push with German idealism and science and technology studies. So there's lots of overlap and lots of variety. So we don't have to just be stuck with these theories that are trying to make grand narratives out of out of nothing. I don't know.
No, for sure. No, and I mean the text that I really had in mind, or even when I wanted to have this conversation with you, was the text that they put out in terms of rethinking German idealism, and I mean I'll put that in the notes there as well. I mean there's some great essays in that in that particular book, and I mean Sean and I think it was Jason, or I'm not sure if it's Jason that wrote the introduction, but I know Sean wrote it or co-wrote it with somebody.
Caraway, and Sean that did it. But Jason does have an essay in it, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, there's an essay of him in there as well. Yeah. But I mean, the introduction, just the introduction part to that book, I mean, just blew my mind because it really shows what they've been doing or trying to do through the North American Schelling Society. And I mean, they beautifully talk about, pretty much what we've been talking about, and why German idealism just hasn't died off. In fact, it's coming back to haunt people in a particular way.
Actually, there's a line in that text that says the specter haunting Europe is not Marx, but German idealism. It's kind of
Exactly.
funny.
Yeah. No, that's it. Exactly. That's the exact line. Beautiful. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's what I've been reading as well. And then obviously, like I shared with you, like I read Sean's Thinking Nature after reading your essay. And your essay was just so helpful for me to go out and figure out. Well, I mean, I was reading it through the lens of that introduction, right? So I'd come off that. I didn't read all the essays in that particular ontology. But I mean, that's when I grabbed onto your essay, and then I could see, this is what you're wrestling with.
Mm-hmm.
Like how does, nature philosophy, how can we rethink nature philosophy in a particular way that, I mean, makes sense for the 21st century, for our particular age. And it's just so uplifting. It's to me, it's a message of hope, right? And it's just not stuck in this, this deconstructive
But you,
nihilism garbage that I see all over the place. Like I just can't stand it. I mean, this is why I'm so happy to, coming off the conversation with Matt Segall, not Matt McManus, but I mean, and with you now, because I thought it was the perfect segue, because you guys are just burning that flame, like you're literally like, okay, let's spark this up, like let's get this thing going here. And to me, that's where the hope really is,
you absolutely. So the like that even in that essay, I mean, my background in science is not as strong as Matt. Matt does a lot of background in science, you know, debates physicists, biologists, chemists, everybody. But the way that I wanted to write that essay was, to do something that Jason Worth does. Jason Worth says, in a lot of his books, he says he wants to think along with Schelling, and that way he doesn't step on. He's a Buddhist monk, right?
Yeah.
Um, Beautiful about that too. He's a really great guy too. And the thing is that he doesn't want to speak on behalf of Schelling. He wants to think along with Schelling. And I wanted to do that gesture as well too. And I wanted to make sure that it was not linear. I wanted to bring up random stuff, which sometimes disorientated people when they read it, because like, why are they bringing up Claire and then here he's doing some of this other? I did this on purpose because I wanted to do this kind of hermeneutics of nature and also rethink nature. But the way that I had to rethink nature was to rethink our interactions with nature. And so as you see through it, I call it the symptom of the age, which is basically our coming, our awareness of ourselves and of the world, but our awareness of objectifying the world, making the world into an object or into an invented object, as Kengihem says. And the funny thing is that really all I was doing in that paper is rethinking the concept of nature, making it a more inclusive concept, and talking about what is dynamism, what is this kind of organic connectivity that we can think through these relationships. And so, really, nature's no different than the human. And I get a, I'm wish I'm with Matt on this, that Matt and I both agree that we're both panpsychists.
Mm.
And so like I want to extend, like Schelling says, extend reason to nature. Not that I think that nature's sitting there scratching itself saying, oh, what should I rationalize about today? And no, I think that there are certain different degrees of expressivity with nature and with humans as well. So there's so much that we can do and so much that we can think through. And there's this great, rich tradition that I want more people to think through, because materialism and the history of materialism is so it's I think it's destructive.
Mm.
I think that the new age um, materialists, or the reductive materialists, I think they're doing a lot of damage to the world and philosophy, because we humans, we do things. When we express ourselves, we create things.
Yeah.
We need to determine ourselves by doing things. And when we see things that we don't recognize in our own image, we destroy it. We try to consume it. We try to make it our own. And so I wanted to break that trend.
No,
And that
and
was,
I think you succeeded. I mean, I just like, well, because like I was reading it through the rethinking sort of
Yes.
motif. And I mean, obviously now that, I'd read a bit of Sean's work and reading, so I see all those particular influences all at play. And I mean, it's almost impossible for me now to have got to see a bit of Matt's thinking and in terms of how he's interpreting idealism. So I mean, that's all speaking to me in the text. Like I'm seeing all these different voices in there. But to me, it's just what I'm so excited about as well is that it's taking institutional roots. Like I mean, you guys are you're up at York. I mean,
Hmm.
Sean's out in it's really taking root across North America, which I'm super excited about as well. And the fact that it's taking on like it's really kind of catching fire online and people are communicating online in a much more rapid way. Like, I mean, I see so much hope there as well. I mean, everybody talks about technology I mean, it's a horrible whatever. But I mean, on the flip side of it, I mean, we're seeing movements like this, right? You're seeing these tribes and these groups online that are coalescing around whether they be podcasts or, societies, civic societies that are doing this type of work or, universities. And there's a lot of people that are shitting all over our universities these days. It's like, but there's some good work going on there, as well. So to me, I'm just latching on to that as a good, just a sense of hope. I'm very hopeful about that, and the fact that you guys are all young academics coming up, right? I mean, Matt is he's just got like he's just got his professorship essentially. He's just starting his career. I mean, even Sean is a pretty well. I mean, he's a more seasoned academic, but I mean, he's not over the hill in terms of like Charles Taylor, for example. Like he's got a lot of gas left in his tank as well. And I mean, yourself and I mean Matt McManus and even the whole crew over at the Pill Pod. I mean, they're all PhDs doing this type of work online now, and there's just as much good academic work happening outside the universities uh, and bouncing back, kind
Right.
of having a boomerang effect back to the universities. So, I mean, to me, that's super exciting type stuff, you know?
Yeah. And it's the funny thing is that I'm not even in a philosophy department. I'm in the humanities department. I'm in an
Okay.
I'm in an interdisciplinary project because I'm in an interdisciplinary department.
Faculty or department.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk about cosmologies and ontology and theology. I wanted to talk about all three, and you can't really do that in a philosophy department when it's really dominated by analytic philosophy. Not that there's anything wrong with analytic philosophy, but it, you know,
We can say there's a lot wrong with
okay, there's a lot wrong with it. Yes. um, so yeah, it seems that in the same sense that the German idealists were creating encyclopedias and Schelling liked the idea of a sim philosophy, which by the way is like a group of people working together, not putting their name on anything and just working at ideas. And the same thing is going on. I'm trying to do the same kind of thing, make a sim philosophical community with other people. Matt's also a part of this, the Pill Pod, and Matt McManus is also a part of this as well.
Yeah.
Uh, Matt is actually right out there doing politics. I mean, he's part of the NDP. He's writing. He's, on his putting out book after book after book. So I think there's something going on. I think there's something in the air. I agree with you for sure, 100%.
Yeah. No, and I mean, well, I mean, I don't know if when I think back to Matt's work in terms of, like, I mean, he really is, a sort of left-wing activist in a certain way, very engrossed in politics. I mean, with Ben Burgess and stuff like that. But I mean, this dimension that I'm seeing now that is very much to me a progressive, and it's very much to the left sort of thinking that is not as predominant. I mean, it's not something that you go out and see and like pop out of an online magazine like Jacobin. Like I have respect for Marxists and socialists and that type of stuff, but there's this deeper philosophy on the left or on the progressive wing of things is very much present, and I think there's a lot of hope there as well. I mean, if you want to go out and call it maybe the sort of ecological wing to things on the left is a pretty exciting frame for what you guys are doing as well there
You
in
know what
terms
makes
of
me you know it's okay. So I want to address this because you brought this up, and
yeah.
this is a perfect medium to address this. The problem with Marxists is that they're too humanist. They don't want to
Mm,
go beyond the human sphere. They want to think of things in regards to class struggle. They don't want to think about ecology. They don't want to think about the world. We're not going to have a proletariat if there is no world, pretty much. Just to sound kind of vulgar there by saying that, but it's the truth. So in a sense, it's not like I have a lot of Marxist friends, and I do respect the early Marxist work. I do like, the German ideology. Um, but I think there's more. I mean, Engels wrote a terrible, terrible, terrible text on Schelling, and he did not understand him at all.
mm,
And the kind of the young Hegelians from, you know, even Feuerbach before that never understood Schelling's philosophy. They were, super pro Hegelian and didn't see Schelling's philosophy as progressive, as organic, as this great system. They just saw him as some state philosopher, which is not true. So a lot of people see, if you're not working within, as Badiou says, within, the sutured politics, people don't think you're doing anything real, and that's the problem. No, there's
or
so much
worthwhile, yeah.
or worthwhile. Yes, so we have to kind of desuture ourselves from politics. Politics has now become everything. It's everywhere and nowhere. There's
Mm.
theological politics, there's ecological politics, there's philosophical politics, there's all of these things that are kind of, burning in the background that we need to start rethinking as opposed to just Marxism. That's my take on it.
No, for sure. Yeah. No, and I mean, and the little that I've read on Schelling as well, I mean, it's not only just a philosophy of nature, but I mean, it's a philosophy of revelation. So you're talking
Yes.
philosophy of religion. And then again, back to Sean's work on that as well. And I'm deeply concerned about what's going on the left. And this came up in my conversation with Matt as well, Segall, that, that the left has been seeding religion
Hmm.
very much to the right and to conservatives, which is a real shame because I mean, there's just as much of a rich tradition, very much on the left. I mean, even somebody like Pope Francis and I mean, Sean McGrath, I mean, in terms of some of the writing that he writes about there, in terms of how excited he is about the encyclical, in terms of, on the environment that he went out and wrote. Um, and that to me is all very exciting type stuff as well. But you're seeing a backlash of that very much on the right, right? And Matt McManus actually writes about that quite a bit in terms of his concern there, in terms of the sort of trad Catholics and
But
crazy
you know
stuff
that
that
I
we're
mean
witnessing as well.
that's just stereotypes. I mean, look at Paul Tillich. Paul Tillich
Yeah,
is a Christian socialist. Karl
exactly.
Lewis. I
Yeah,
mean, there's so much. Karl Rahner, like so many great thinkers in this Catholic tradition. Keep in mind, this Catholic tradition is
so
coming from
rich.
Germany and Bavaria. And
Yeah.
who are they studying with? They're studying with students of Heidegger and
Mm,
Habermas and Gadamer and Jaspers, and all of these great, wonderful thinkers are coming out of this tradition, and they're rethinking these things.
mm,
Um, and it's funny because, in a sense, you know, people are slightly returning to the kind of speculative theology. Even Zizek, in his
yeah.
talk with Peterson, he called himself a what did he call him? An atheist Christian or something like that. I think he referred to himself as,
Yeah.
and he referred to himself as a Hegelian, not a Marxist. So there's a lot of things that are, you know, kind of emerging and I agree with you that this dismissal of theology and even the spiritual roots to anything is very problematic because we have a bunch of, well, not a bunch of, sorry, we have a sect of materialists that are calling the shots, and they find anything that is spiritual or, immaterial or anything speculative to be problematic.
Yeah.
And that's also, I mean, we're living in a kind of spiritual decay right now. Like, look, you go on YouTube, what's on YouTube? ASMR everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Reiki, people are rethinking Hinduism and Buddhism, right?
Yeah,
We're having a kind of spiritual crisis, and people are trying to find their mark in something. You know, some
totally.
people people are rethinking Catholic philosophy.
Yeah,
I mean, I went through this tradition. I after reading Sean, and I wanted to read everything, and I went to a Catholic school when I was younger. So I mean, like, I
yeah,
wanted to read all of these wonderful texts, and they're great. I mean, you don't read Augustine's Confessions, you're missing out on something. You don't read,
for sure.
John of Canterbury or Anselm or any of these things. So it's I
No,
don't know.
well, there's this. I mean, one, the Catholic tradition. I mean, the Catholic intellectual tradition and Catholic theology is so rich and so deep.
Mhm,
And I mean, even within the Protestant tradition as well. I mean, once you really
right.
get into it, I mean, it's just as rich and just as inspiring and very touching. And I mean, I can't do philosophy without thinking about theology in a certain way. I mean, because of even my own formation in terms of in religious studies. I mean, I wasn't doing theology proper. I mean, it's the sociology and anthropology of religion. But what I appreciated about being exposed to that is we took a very cosmopolitan sort of look at things. Right? You weren't allowed to just go out and study one tradition. They forced you to go out and study two traditions. So, I studied most of the credits that I went out and accumulated were all in East Asian philosophy. So Japan and some parts of China in terms of Zen Buddhism and Chan actually in China, and then Zen in Japan. And I got exposed to the Kyoto School through that as well, which is another tangent I guess we could go and should go on.
No, no, please
But
do. I mean, it's funny. My German,
yeah,
I'm learning German right now. It's been
yeah.
about 2.5 years, and I had to learn. I was doing French and failing miserably, unfortunately. Sorry to all the French listeners. But
But you're
when
picking up German.
I'm doing German, yeah, and I'm picking up
Uh,
very well. And actually,
okay.
my German teacher is a Heideggerian and
Yeah.
a Taoist monk, actually, believe it or not, and he teaches at York too. This is the funniest thing.
Oh,
And he reads Heidegger as he has a kind of Chinese Heidegger, he calls it. And it's true because in the 1950s, Heidegger is reading Zhuangzi and Lao Tzu and translating the Tao Te Ching. And um, I actually, it was so funny. About 2 years ago, there was a Japanese conference on Japanese philosophy, and he had asked me to come and present. And I said, I know nothing about. I'm one of those people that if I don't know anything about something, I'm not going to talk about it because no way, no
yeah.
way. He said, "Look, I'm going to give you a couple articles. I want you to look at this tradition." So I started reading Nishitani. So
Nice.
Keiji Nishitani,
Yeah.
number one. I didn't know that this young man, when he was in his teens, translated Schelling's Freedom Essay,
Yeah.
became an early Schellingian. This is insane, was a Schellingian, and then met Heidegger, went to Freiburg and studied with Heidegger. Insane,
There was
brilliant.
a lot
Oh,
of
so much.
Japanese scholars that have done that. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I love the way Matt Segall put it. I mean, in terms of like how everything is entangled.
Yes.
And that's how I was. I mean, that's sort of diet how I was exposed to go out and do philosophy and have an open mind in terms of what religion actually really is. It's something that's always in well, it's always in dynamic change. And you can't go out and really pin it down. I mean, the more you try to go out and pin it down, the more you realize that you're completely off the mark in a certain way. And that's the cool thing about the California Institute of Integral Studies, right? I mean, Matt, I mean, that's really where he's coming from, yet he's really honing in on the Western tradition, bringing that into a dialogue with the East. And that's something too that you guys have been doing as well. I mean, on the Discord, I'm always amazed how many people are interested in, East Asian philosophy and comparative philosophy, and some of the text that they're bouncing around on there. Man, it's turned into be like amazing.
It's it's something that I find really, really important. Before COVID happened again, a friend of mine told me to read the Bhagavad Gita. He said, "Now
Nice.
read the Bhagavad Gita and then read Plato's Republic, and tell me that this doesn't predate Plato's Republic." And it's insane. It's so insane how it's so close to it.
Yeah.
in terms of like Plato's auxiliaries and stuff, and just Arjuna, um, and Krishna talk in their talk. But yeah, so I mean, it was reading German idealism that brought me to this, right? It was reading Schelling. That, by the way, Schelling's mythology, and this is the wonderful thing about Schelling's mythology, is that he doesn't have the typical mythology that Christianity is the be all end all. No, he sees mythology and mythologies and all of these cultures as content for consciousness that's filled in the kind of story of humanity, right? So
Mm.
from the Egyptians to the Persians to India to he calls it the Hindu Kush, all the way up into China as well. He's got wonderful lectures on Taoism, and Lao Tzu. And the funny thing is that even Schopenhauer
Mm.
had such
Yep.
a really strong reading of Buddhism as well too. And there's all of this in this tradition. And then look, we're back to German idealism. We talked about integral and East Asian thought, and now we're talking about German idealism again. So all of this is coming from this tradition, and that
Yeah.
they're pulling from the materials that they had at the time, which is in science and all of these things, and even in East Asian philosophy. It's interesting that Schelling had a chance to go on an archaeological dig with an archaeologist called Johann Wagner, Maximilian II, while the English were bombing Rome. No joke. Um, Schelling and Johann Wagner went to Florence and
Mm.
were doing archaeological digs and bringing back stuff. That's still to this day, I think, in the Munich Museum, actually, which is interesting. But you know what I mean? There was this essence of going out and finding the world, not just philosophizing in a
Yeah.
chair like Descartes. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Totally.
um, yeah. Sorry, I
No,
went on a
no, for
tangent
sure.
there.
No, I mean, and that's a beautiful tangent on that. But I mean, I guess, how do you feel about the language thing? Because you said you're learning German now. And this was actually a question that, I mean, because I mean, you're interested in Deleuze as well, right? I mean, it's Deleuze being translated into English, that there's a real kind of Deleuzian boom that's happened over the last little while. So, I mean, I wonder, because I mean, I'm French speaking and I'm from Quebec, and I worry a bit about at times, uh, I mean, the linguistic bubbles that we might be in, right? In terms of, I'm excited that it's taking root in North America in a particular way, but I mean, it's a uniquely Anglophone American Canadian sort of, uh, I'd hate to use the word appropriation, but uh, I totally agree that it's all entangled in a certain way, and but I guess, yeah. How do you feel about the linguistic turn to this type of thing? What are
Well,
you making sense of that?
I struggled with French, but I still could read. I could still read. I mean, at the time I was reading Maine de Biron and Felix Ravesson, and there weren't many translations into English, so I had to read the French, and I had to sit there and spend hour after hour kind of going through and using my trusty dictionary. And the problem is that what's happening even with the French sources, that all the main canonized thinkers are being translated, like Foucault, Nancy. There's nothing wrong with Nancy, Derrida, Serres, like all these people. But then there's this beautifully rich tradition like Blondel and Bergson and La Challier and Maine de Biron and Ravesson and Cousin. That's part of the French spiritualism. That's, by the way, it's slowly picking up as well too. There's a
Yeah,
lot of people writing dissertations and thinking about Ravesson and Biron, and some of them are being translated. But the thing that upsets me about Deleuze is that Deleuze is such a in vogue right now that he's kind of like a black hole. He swallows everything. Like, people need to sell books, so they write his name into a book.
okay,
To kind of show, oh hey, he's relevant right now, and you don't need to do that. I
yeah,
mean, especially with Bergson or any of these great French thinkers, and there are lots of French thinkers that should be being read. The funny thing is, at the Schelling conference, I met a student from Paris, and she was presenting on French spiritualism and its relation to German idealism. So she was
mm,
talking about Cousin and Ravesson and their relation to Schelling. And we were talking about all of these sources, and she had heard of me because I spoke at Lyon about this at one point, about
Okay.
Schelling, and one of the questions was about this, and I talked about it for a bit, and she was super happy. We were talking about these sources. So yes, so in terms of the in terms of that, I wish there was more, more kind of, marginalized writers being translated, and also Deleuze translated into English was really hard, right? I think it's Patton. Is it Patton that translated the? Could be Patton. I'm not sure.
Well, even Pills did a recent pod on the archive
Oh yes, with
project
Daniel W.
through,
Smith. Yeah.
yeah, which is pretty cool as well. I have a bit of a background because in religious studies we do. A lot of people end up falling into the more historical and do archival type stuff. So, the minute I hear archive, I'm like, oh, I light up. I'm like, oh my God, so that pulls into some of my interest in terms of library studies and stuff like that, and how that crosses over with religious studies. But a big part of religious studies it's the language games that
Hmm.
happens, right?
Yep.
As things are translated from one language into another, but also how it's transplanted, across the globe. How Buddhism eventually moved to North America. It's no longer the same type of Buddhism that was originally. And some people see that as bad. Other people see that as innovation, and dynamic change that brings in new ways of interpreting things. So to me, that's exciting. In a way. But I've been fascinating, I guess, with that question watching you guys, because you guys are, some of your previous, you're recovering Deleuzian, so that part I don't want to press you too much on that. But
No.
the friend,
You can
the,
totally. I'm still friends with tons of Deleuzians,
yeah,
and it's just I just kind
well,
of got out of the material. Not that I
yeah,
don't find it. I mean, I joke on you're on Discord, so
yeah,
I joke, I rant and rave about Deleuze, but it's just a joke about, you know it's
yeah.
I have an inside joke about it. But sorry, I interrupted you. Go on.
Well, no, but I guess like my antenna goes up and thinking that, well, there's a language game happening here. It's being translated into French into English, right? And we're witnessing a huge amount of German idealism now being translated into English. And to me, that's not bad or it's not good. To me, I see this as, oh, this is going to have a major impact somewhere along the line
But
on people's
the
minds and people of going out and interpreting the world. So I am super excited to see you guys rethinking German idealism, but it's interesting to me to go out and see that it's the Franco-German traditions that are being
Yes.
reinterpreted within North America and being transformed and taking root within our own particular institutions and within new generations of students and stuff like that are growing up in a completely different context. So, which is cool for me from a sociological and historical sort of phenomenon as well. So,
I
like,
had a I had a Hegelian professor once tell me, this is really funny,
yeah,
that Hegel and Marx left North America when McCarthyism started because it got confused as Sovietism, and so like a lot of the German thinkers, I don't know if this is true or not. I'm just saying
okay, yeah,
what he preached in one of the classes,
yeah,
and that during McCarthy, the witch hunts, that they had, anybody reading anything related to German idealism because of Hegel and Marx, this relation to Russia and the USSR and Sovietism, that a
oh,
lot of it got removed. And then we had this, I guess, renaissance in the 70s, rethinking freedom and maybe some religious aspects. And then in the 80s, you had deconstruction really picking up again, and the French kind of coming over, because a lot of the French thinkers came over to America.
yeah,
And actually, some of the Germans did too, because Habermas actually taught at McMaster in Hamilton, which is mind blowing. But like a lot of these French thinkers, like Derrida was at the University of New York. I think Nancy had come over a couple times. Like a lot of the I saw Rancière with pills, when Rancière came here. Um, was
York,
it at Ryerson? Is it Ryerson? I think we went and saw it. Yeah, maybe on the
really?
politics of art. Yeah, politics of aesthetics. Yeah. So I think it was just I don't know if it had, I've always wondered if maybe it's because Canada's heritage is also French as well too, right? I mean, we also indigenous, but we
Yeah.
have a lot of a French background that maybe that's what kind of maybe, you know, maybe helped, push the French thinkers into popularity. Because I
Well,
know in
even
this,
Hegelian. I mean, the Hegelian type
yeah.
stuff up at the University of Pittsburgh. The guy is,
Oh
what is it,
yes,
Brandon? And then obviously
Brandon,
we
yeah.
have Taylor up in Canada. I mean, there's Grant as well. So, I mean, there's quite a bit of stuff that's written on Canada in terms of a Canadian idealist tradition, right? That is based on Hegelian type thought. So, I mean, it's there either which way. But I mean, when it comes back to the fore at various points in history and stuff like that, to me, it's interesting to go out and view that. And I'm interested in just kind of the Canadian history of philosophy and Canadian history. Well, the philosophy of history in Canada and how it compares to North America or the U.S. as well is an interesting question. So the founding of the Schelling Society as an event is a really interesting historical moment, I think, in terms of what's going on there with German idealism within the North American context.
So I can give you a little backstory on this because
Okay.
so Sean and Jason stepped down from presidents of the North American Schelling Society because they wanted to um,
Pass it
kind
on.
of give the torch on to a new generation. So now we have Talatama Rajan, who is a Schillingian from Western University, so still Canadian, and we have an American um, uh, professor who's amazing. She's just the sweetest and most intellectually brilliant um, scholar you'll ever meet. Marcela Garcia, who's amazing. Um, and so they kind of let it on. But so Jason and Sean are still there. So this is what they said. So before they kind of handed off the torch, they said that just like what I said, there was nobody talking about Schelling, and they just wanted to get together and talk about Schelling. And they run their own journal too, Kabiri, by the way,
Yep.
which is a fantastic journal. So, like a friend of mine, Kyla Bruff, who teaches at Carleton University in Canada, who's also studying, who's working on Schelling and Adorno, and is publishing a book that's coming out soon on. It's just so amazing how this started. They just wanted to, get a bunch of people together and their students, and Jason got his students and Sean got his, and they started this great, wonderful um, society. And and they got in touch with one of the great German sources of Schelling studies, Laurie Hune, and they got a conference in Germany, and then they just kind of crisscrossed. They went from Germany to Mexico City to Seattle, where Jason lives, and then from Seattle to Newfoundland, and then actually they linked the Japanese Schelling Society with the North American Schelling Society. So we had
Oh, no
Japanese
way.
scholars.
I
Yeah, we
didn't
had
know that.
yeah, so Japanese scholars linked, and now I believe they're linking up with the European Schelling Society, it's run in England by Daniel Whistler, who's an unbelievable good scholar and really nice dude as well. So
Oh, okay, cool. Oh,
yeah,
so I
so
didn't
it's
I didn't
really,
realize the international connections there as well. Well, I knew that it was in liaison, the North American one that was in cahoots with the European. I mean, they needed approval to go out and set that up. But I mean, even
but
that is cool to go out and witness as well, that they're kind of passing on the baton in terms of, tradition they're passing on and how that's going to go out and, take on a bit of a life of its own with a new generation of scholars playing
but
around.
let me tell you how humble these guys are, because
Yeah.
they were the nicest people I've ever met. They
Yeah.
sat there and said, "Listen, we're not the society. You are the society. And they
Yeah.
pointed to all of us. They said, and we look to you. We looked, this is a growing society now, and we want more scholars to get involved, and we want more people involved with the journal and all of these things. And so it's really, really nice hearing that, because I never knew these people before. I just had their books and I read their books and
Yeah.
maybe spoke to them once in a while via email or on Twitter or on Facebook or something.
Yeah.
And then to meet them and them be is just as nice and just as warm and encouraging. And let me tell you, like, I have sent emails back and forth with Sean multiple times, and he has written, I can't even tell you, like, war and peace length style emails telling me to, keep
Cool.
doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Think this, never. And he, he'll send me a bunch of Bible passages as well too. Like, rethink this, really think about the theological aspect that's in this passage from Schelling. And, he doesn't have to do that. And I think that's just so nice,
Yeah. No, that's great news. I mean, I'm happy. Oh, I mean, because Jason as well. I mean, Jason, well, I know that Sean has a bit of a rapport kind of with integral philosophy, but Jason does through, because Matt raved, Matt Segall, not Matt McManus, too many Matts bouncing around here, in terms of the conversations that they've had around the California Institute of Integral Studies. So that to me is an interesting twist on all of this as well. So that is interesting to see.
Actually, Jason and I, we email back and forth. We share pictures of Schelling. So rare pictures of Schelling. Him and I email back and forth. I've sent him a couple pictures I sent him one picture of Heidegger in the hut with a picture of Schelling on the table, and I sent that to him, and he loved that. And then I sent him a couple other pictures that I found from the Munich archives. And so I once in a while I'll just send him to him. I'll be like, hey, here's another picture, and just thank you, Chris. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, to me, these are all conversations to be continued as well. I mean, I wanted to have this conversation for you. I mean, when I launched the pod, I shared with you that, trust me, I'm going to reach out at one point. And once I had Matt lined up, that Matt Segall, I knew that, that's it. I got to get Chris on to go out and spark this up and have a good in-depth dive around German idealism or rethinking German idealism. So no, I mean, thank you so much for your time. And trust me, we're going to be having a lot more conversations. And
all right. Well, thank you for having me on. And I listened to your. Sorry, there's lots of noise. I'm in the city, so.
No stress.
I listened to your show with Matt Segall, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And you do a really good job. You have a really good podcast voice, so this is
cool.
good. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think your shows will get, and I'll help spread it around too. So, I'll do my best to, get it out there, because I think you're doing a great job.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, thank you so much. Like I said, and the emails we exchanged, I mean, this to me has just been so much fun. So, and it's a whole education for me, ongoing education for me as well. So I can't thank you enough, and it's giving me so much meaning and hope as well. So definitely.
But I wanted to say one last thing. My grandfather, who was a professor at George Brown College, he used to always say to me that LIFE, learning is forever. And as cheesy as that sounds.
Yeah.
But there's something I've noticed about you. You are someone that you're always wanting to learn. That's what I like about you. Even if you don't know something, you want to learn about something. You ask a question or ask for something to read or ask this, or you know what I'm saying? So this is a trait that you have that I think is really good. And you should keep harnessing you should keep harnessing this skill and harness all the stuff that you're learning and keep doing it, because I think you're going to do really well. So thank you for having me too.
No, definitely. Thank you. And to be continued. That's the way I like to end it.
All right.
Peace, bud.